θα στο πάρα πολύ για την πρόσκληση. Είναι μια πάρα πολύ μεγάλη τιμή για μένα να είμαι εδώ σήμερα και να παρουσιάσω αυτό το keynote. Ευτυχώς μπορώ να το κάνω στα αγγλικά, διότι τα ελληνικά μου δεν είναι τόσο καλά τώρα. Μαθαίνω ακόμα, αλλά νομίζω δεν φτάνει ένα keynote ακόμα. So I switched to English now, and I just said that I'm very glad that I can do this keynote in English because my Greek isn't so good yet, though I'm trying to improve on that. I'm very honored to be here today, and when I got the invitation to hold this keynote, I was at the same time very pleased and a bit terrified because I thought, what can I tell experts from HCI as a non-expert in HCI? Because what we do in Mainz really is, I think, a different perspective. We come from communication and media psychology research, but I had a couple of very nice conversations with Panayotis here in Syros, and we figured out that there's a lot of overlap between the things that we're interested in, and I hope that the different approaches to what we do can be fruitful. So this is not supposed to be so much an overview of our work. Of course, I will briefly also talk about what we're doing in Mainz, but mainly I want to introduce one topic that we are very interested in, digital disconnection, and open up discussion on how media psychology and HCI research can maybe fruitfully work together in having a look at this, I think, important topic. But at first, a short intro to who we are. Maybe also where we're from. I think for good reason, probably none of you knows where Mainz is. That may be a disadvantage compared to the other keynote speakers. Everybody knows where Singapore is. Probably most people know where Eindhoven is. And nobody, for good reason, knows where Mainz is. So I put in this little map over there. Mainz is a mid-sized town quite close to Frankfurt. But for some reason, we have a very large university. And me and my team, we're working at the communication department. That's one of the largest communication departments in Germany. We have 15 professors, about 40 pre- and postdoc researchers, roughly 1,500 students in BA and MA programs. And the research that happens there basically covers all areas of communication research, PR, political communication, health communication, media psychology, media effects. That's what we do. And much of what I talk about today is not exclusively, or maybe not even mainly based on my own work, but of that of my team. Frank Schneider is my postdoctoral fellow. And then I have three wonderful PhD students, Lisa Gilbert, Rebecca Kreling, and Felix Dietrich. And I'm very happy that the three of them are also here with us today, and also did a great job already on two nice presentations on the first. So sort of the departing point for much of what we do is the fact that over the past years, we've seen tremendous changes in mobile and digital media environments. Of course, media use is now characterized by constant availability of media content and communication. There's more and more blurring between the boundaries of use and non-use of media and technology. In communication, we've termed this concept of mass personal communication. So there's more and more mix up of classical mass communication, one-to-many communication, which was the standard, so to speak, when people watch TV or listen to the radio. And now we have social media where there's a mix of mass communication and personal communication coming together, which of course is important implications for media uses and effects. Media use gets more and more nonlinear and independent from time and space. People are no longer restricted to TV programs, but can sort of be their own program directors and watch their favorite content whenever they want. And also there's a growing fragmentation of media use and communication. There's second screening, there's all these micro episodes of checking your smartphone maybe 100 times per day. So generally we can say that media use and effects unfold under new boundary conditions. And that is what we are very interested in, and looking at the implications of those changes for media use, but also for media users. So over the past years, we've tried to do a lot of research on these new preconditions of use, have looked into the consequences of ubiquity of media use, of fragmentation, also of algorithmic curation. Felix has been talking about the implications of algorithms also for entertainment processes on Wednesday. We look at new forms of use, for example, media multitasking and how this impacts users and effects. Look at new boundary conditions such as social pressure, which for us as entertainment research, we do a lot of entertainment research, is actually new. 10 years ago, we always looked at media use as a very intrinsically motivated activity. People turn to media use, turn to media content that they want to use and receive in the given situation. Now, in the times of social media, of course, media use is more and more also driven by social pressure, social expectations. So then there's a new sort of motivational background to media use. There's fear of missing out if you don't use media in a certain way. And very often, because of the ubiquity of media use, people run into goal conflicts between wanting to use media on the one hand, wanting to communicate on the one hand, wanting to use technology on the one hand, and maybe being in the situation where they should actually do something else. That already brings me to our second main area of research, which is the self-regulatory challenges of these new media environments, where we look at self-regulation failure. You may have heard, of course, not have experienced this yourself, but there is a growing concern around procrastination with media use. If you don't have a problem with procrastination yourself, maybe you've noticed in your students that it's more and more difficult for them to concentrate on tasks, not to be distracted by technologies. That is something that we're really interested in. And of course, also, we look into the psychological mechanisms behind that, like self-control issues and processes, media habits, so on and so forth. And the third sort of column of our research is the effects of new technology use on mental health and psychological well-being. And here we really try to have a balanced view, both on the negative effects. We do a lot of research, for example, on digital stress, but also on feelings of guilt. Very often, if people experience self-regulatory failure with media use, they feel very guilty about their media use. But also look at media as a resource, for example, in stress recovery, stress coping. Rebecca and I have just finished a larger funded project on media use and resilience, so how people can use entertaining media to become more resilient to everyday adversity. Another positive media resource could also be authenticity, so being able to express yourself freely and to self-present freely, for example, in social media. So if we wanted to put a label on what we do, I think the central concept of what we're looking into in our research is digital resilience. And this, of course, has two sides. On the one hand, we are interested in how media users can actually become resilient to the challenges they face in digital media environments. How can they cope with the new demands? And on the other hand, we're interested in how media users can be or become resilient through media. So how media can be a resource, a source of resilience, and actually help people to be resilient in everyday life. And today, I want to talk about the role of connection and disconnection processes for this issue of digital resilience. So maybe we can take a first look at the connection between digital well-being and connection, disconnection. Of course, I'm sure you are very aware of the fact that there's a lot of discourse about this, which is or tends to be very negatively framed. Both in the media, there's a lot of coverage on the potential negative effects of digital media. Then we have high-impact books like that of Jonathan Haidt, for example, on the anxious generation, where he claims that basically social media have ruined the complete generation of young people in the Western world, which I totally disagree with. But on the other hand, this illustrates that there's a lot of discussion going on, and with our research, we want to add a bit or contribute a bit to this discussion with our data. So let's take a look at the role of connection and disconnection within this area of digital well-being. And the first thing that we can notice is that, yes, more and more people do in fact become more POPC, permanently online, permanently connected. This is a nice figure from a very recent survey from the Pew Research Center that looked into how constantly connected actually people feel in different parts of the world. And the bars in dark green over here, those are the percentages of people in the different countries that say, yes, I'm almost constantly connected to the internet through some kind of device. And the light greens here are several times per day. And we see that in many parts of the world. For example, in the highly technologized countries like the US or Japan, a very large proportion of people say that, yes, they are permanently online. In other parts of the world, for example, Germany or Greece, the picture is a bit different. Maybe we can speculate a bit about the reasons for that in the discussion. See, anyway, there's evidence that more and more people are constantly connected, constantly available. In our research, we have also tried to look a bit at the psychological side of this state of being POPC, permanently online, permanently connected, and have tried to do research on the psychological correlates of that, so to speak, the POPC mindset, and have developed the concept of online vigilance, which refers to individual differences in how strongly people are cognitively oriented to being permanently online and permanently connected, how strongly they're chronically attending incoming online stimuli, and how they, or whether they have a motivational disposition to prioritize online content and options over offline behavior. And this also was the basis for a scale measurement instrument that we developed with 3 factors: salience, describing this constant thinking about online content, monitoring, constant checking of what's going on online, and reactability, prioritizing everything that has something to do with your smartphone or with online cues, even in offline situations. And of course, we might ask, how could this POPC behavior, being constantly online, and POPC mindset, thinking about online related cues all the time, how could this impact psychological well-being? And in our research, one process that we look at quite closely is digital stress. I'm sure that you're all familiar with the subjective feeling of being stressed, but maybe I can just add a little bit of theoretical background here. In psychology, we very often refer to the transactional model of stress, which is the standard model of stress in psychology, which suggests that stress is the result of a person-environment transaction. So there's situational demands that sort of interact with the resources a person has in a given situation. And depending on the appraisal of the situation, whether the individual feels that his or her situational resources actually match the demands of the situation can either be interpreted as non-threatening or as a threat. And if we perceive threat, then this leads to a stress reaction. And then in a second sort of appraisal, we can think about our coping actions and options. Do we have resources to resolve the situation? And then ideally react in a way that reduces stress. So that's what psychologists think how stress works. And research shows that, in fact, there are a lot of obvious connections between being permanently online and perceptions of stress. There's been a lot of research over the past years, not only from our group, but also from colleagues in media psychology, that demonstrate that, in fact, there are a lot of digital stressors that increase people's perceived stress in everyday life. For example, this factor of online vigilance that I've already been talking about, but also connection overload. So the perception that you're just overwhelmed by the amount of communication, amount of messages, amount of content that you have to respond to, availability stress, social expectations of being constantly online, fear of missing out, being stressed because you think or have the feeling that By not using technology enough, you may miss something. Goal conflict, your technology use keeps you from attending to other goals, but also approval anxiety. So when people self-present online, for example, they can get very stressed about the reactions they may or may not receive on their self-presentations and whether they will be positive or negative. So generally, we can say that digital stress is produced or tends to happen when technology increases the demands within situations. For example, when people multitask and thus have increased situational demands, or when digital media use reduces the resources available in a given situation, for example, through online vigilance, when people think a lot about online use and thus have fewer resources for other things. Digital stress can be affected by our subjective experiences of digital media use in terms of overload or goal conflict, or also when we feel that our situational coping capabilities are restricted. For example, in situations where we actually want to be offline, we want to, for example, focus on a social interaction with a friend or on a nice dinner with a partner, but at the same time feel the obligation to be constantly available. So yes, there's a lot of digital stress out there, and connection plays a big role. And there's evidence that more and more users are becoming aware of this fact, feeling more and more stressed, feeling more and more, or feeling not anymore at ease with their own media use. For example, there's data from Büchi in a large survey that demonstrates there's an increasing amount of people, those were people from Switzerland, that perceive their digital media use as being excessive or problematic, and attributed this to being permanently connected, and have the experience that this results in negative media effects. And because of that, there's a growing critical public discourse around the benefits and disadvantages of connectivity. And this more and more seems to sort of result in what we could call a digital backlash. So maybe after years and phases of people being very positive about the benefits of constant connectivity, we now see that users are becoming more critical, and that the need or the felt necessity for more digital autonomy is increasing. So this becomes a big issue for users as well. Because of that, I think there's a good reason to believe that questions of connection and disconnection are really closely connected to well-being in these highly digitalized and highly media-prone times and environments. And also recent research on digital well-being has come to the same conclusion. I think this is very nicely expressed in this citation from my colleague Marieke van den Abele from the University of Ghent, who has written a very influential paper, influential in communication research, on what digital well-being actually is. And she says, now that technologies permitted us to be permanently online and permanently connected, we face a new challenge. How do we obtain a healthy balance between connectivity and disconnectivity? And this also seems to be a growing issue for users, finding the sweet spot of being connected on the one hand and disconnected on the other hand. So we believe that for digital resilience, disconnection really is a key issue and worth looking into further. So maybe we can take a quick look at what we already know about digital disconnection, how people perform it, and what effects it may have. Maybe a quick definition first. Disconnection refers to the deliberate setting of limits to ubiquitous connectivity. So it refers to phases of non-use or restricted use of digital media. Importantly, it's temporary, so it does not describe deciding not to use a certain media or technology or stop using that completely, but it's about temporary disconnection with varying timeframes. So a couple of minutes, couple of hours, or even days that people decide to disconnect from applications or devices. And importantly, it's an intentional, deliberate process. Of course, there's also unintentional forms of disconnection, for example, when you run out of battery on your smartphone, but those, of course, are not as interesting from a psychological point of view. And like I already said, disconnection is distinct from things like discontinuance. You decide that you don't want to use social media anymore, or non-adoption, you never actually start using a smartphone. Those are different things. So one important question that we could ask is, how prevalent is disconnection actually? And here I've brought data from a large literature review presented by Nassen et al., who looked at the extant research on disconnection and tried to sum up the percentages of people we find in surveys on disconnection that either consider disconnecting in the future or have actually engaged in disconnection. You see the figures are quite diverse here, which is because the definitions of disconnection differ between the different studies, but roughly between 30 and 80% of survey participants have already thought about disconnecting more or want to disconnect more, and roughly 20 to 60% of participants have already engaged in some kind of disconnection behavior. So the next interesting question to ask would be, why do people do it? So what are the motivations behind disconnection behaviors? And again, findings from the Nassen paper, we see that there's a lot of reasons: perceived overuse, social interaction. So people want to increase the relationship qualities with their offline contacts, productivity, people feel distracted and want to be more productive, privacy issues, perceived usefulness, people just don't see any use in or any benefits in using technology anymore. But also, and for the focus of our talk here, most importantly, one important reason for disconnecting is psychological well-being. So people intend to disconnect to improve their well-being. They seem to have the delay theory that disconnecting is good for their mental health. So I think now is the moment of truth where we have to think about how effective disconnection really is. Because obviously there's great hopes about positive and beneficial effects of disconnection. And again, there's a lot of media coverage on that talks about digital detox and how beneficial it is for people to take some breaks from social media or from smartphones. There's a lot of self-help literature supposedly supporting people in their digital detox endeavors. So I think it's important to take a close and critical look on how effective these disconnection strategies and digital detox actually is. Spoiler, the data that we have or that they're out there are not very encouraging. For example, there is a recent meta-analysis by Leonard that looked at the effects of social media abstinence. So intervention studies that looked at people or instructed participants to not use social media for a certain period of time, usually 1 or 2 weeks, and measured well-being outcomes. And in the meta-analysis, Leonard and colleagues looked at positive effect, negative effect, so whether people felt better or less worse when they decreased social media use, and life satisfaction, whether this sort of disconnection would increase life satisfaction. In this figure here, we see the average effect for negative effect. Here we see that the different studies that went into the meta-analysis, and you can already see that there's only 2 studies, the one up here and the one down here, that actually found any significant results. The one negative effects, so reductions in negative effect, the other one increases in negative effect, and the mean effect size is not distinct from 0. So no effect on negative effect. People did not feel less bad as a consequence of disconnecting from social media. Same holds true for positive effect. So people did not show increases in positive effect after disconnecting, and also the same picture for life satisfaction. Again, no effect at all. So disconnecting from social media did not increase people's psychological well-being. Of course, social media are just part of the picture. There are other research papers, and of course, also literature reviews. For example, a very good review paper by Radke et al. That did not only address social media abstinence, but also other forms of interventions like smartphone abstinences or disconnecting from messengers temporarily. But the picture is quite similar. We do see reductions in usage time. So yes, these disconnection interventions are effective in reducing people's usage times. But again, we see very ambivalent effects on well-being. There are a few studies that find positive effects, others finding negative effects, and the majority finding non-effects or no effects at all. There's a lot of problems, various indicators of well-being, and that makes it a bit harder to compare these studies. But overall, we do not find any evidence for consistent positive effects of disconnection. And of course, we can now ask ourselves, why is that? So there's big hopes in disconnection. Then if we look at the effects of disconnection on people's well-being, then we don't actually find any positive outcomes. We believe that there's a lot of different reasons, which partly are connected to the limitations of previous research. One issue is time frame. So many of these intervention studies have rather lengthy interventions and force people to disconnect from social media or from their smartphone for a whole week or even for 2 weeks. That, of course, could be an issue. There's conceptual issues, inconsistent definitions and levels of analysis of disconnection. Of course, it makes a difference whether you disconnect from your smartphone completely or only from a certain application. There's different measures of well-being. So there's no sort of measurement standard for well-being. And I personally think this is the most important reason. The intervention studies, of course, very often have very rigid designs. So they usually look at intrinsically motivated forms of disconnection. People are instructed to disconnect, not by their own decision, but because they are participants in an experiment and are told to behave in a certain way for a certain amount. This is why we believe that disconnection actually needs to be tested in the wild, so where it happens spontaneously in people's everyday lives. And this is what Alicia did in one of her dissertation studies, where she looked at these more spontaneous forms of disconnection with a 14-day experience sampling study with 230 participants, roughly 12,000 situations that were sort of surveyed with the ESM methodology. And the study included another couple of different variables, but we here look at well-being in particular, affective well-being, stress, energy level, and how connected or disconnected people felt. As I said, spontaneously occurring forms of digital disconnection, whether in the situations where people responded to the ESM prompts, they were engaging in disconnection strategies or not, and also whether this disconnection was more or less intrinsically motivated. These are the results, and here the effects that are marked with circles are the within-person effects. The ones with the triangles are the between-person effects. So the within-person effects are more interesting for us because they demonstrate whether there's any change within people's average levels of well-being, depending on them being situationally disconnected or not. What we see here is that in fact there were significant effects on affective well-being. So in our study, people did feel better in situations where they were disconnected. They did feel that they had more energy, and interestingly, they also felt more connected, presumably to the offline contacts or the offline persons that they were interacting with in that situations. Interestingly, we did not find significant effect for stress in this study. The effects were, a bit stronger when disconnection was intrinsically motivated. So if people felt that like they decided themselves to disconnect in that situation, but they were also pretty short-lived. So the positive effects did not extend to the next measurement point, but only within the situation where people were surveyed in the ESM survey. So maybe a short recap what we've found so far. First of all, disconnection is more and more prevalent in people's everyday lives. People plan to disconnect more or have already started disconnecting. Very often users are motivated to disconnect because they hope that this will benefit their psychological well-being. Unfortunately, disconnection interventions seem to have questionable or no effect at all, whereas spontaneous forms of disconnection seem to be a bit more promising in terms of positive well-being effects. But obviously, there are many open questions that remain unresolved. And in the last couple of minutes of my presentation, I want to look into those and open up for discussion afterwards. So what's left to do in disconnection research from our perspective? First of all, we definitely have to learn more about the mechanisms. So in terms of stress, for example, we don't really know how effects of disconnection on stress, how they actually work. And different mechanisms could also have very contradictory effects. For example, on the one hand, disconnecting could reduce situational demands because people receive fewer notifications, for example, but could also increase demands because they feel that, for example, they feel socially pressured to reconnect, or they have to think about connection and disconnection strategies and negotiate situationally negotiate these strategies, which can be demanded. Disconnection could increase resources, for example, by decreasing online vigilance, but it could also decrease resources, for example, because people feel less connected to their social environment. People could perceive disconnection either as a threat, feel FOMO, have the feeling that they should be connected, or it could help them to relax, to feel that they are more connected to their offline context, so on and so forth. And lastly, in terms of coping options, people could feel that they have more coping options because they are less obligated to connect, but also because they feel disconnected, feel that they have less social support and feel less able to cope in certain situations. So we need to know more about the connections between disconnection behaviors and the well-being outcome variables that we're actually interested in. A second big issue that we're facing is the temporal dynamics of disconnection. And so far, research very often is dominated by a dichotomous view on connection and disconnection. So very often, studies treat connection, disconnection as exclusive states where people are either connected or disconnected, and where phases of connection and disconnection follow each other, which of course is not very realistic. In everyday life, connection and disconnection probably look more like that, where, for example, people are in the office and are, on the one hand, connected to their business contacts, but maybe disconnected from their personal or private contacts. There could also be phases where people are disconnected unintentionally because they sleep and don't make an actual deliberate decision to be disconnected. So understanding this temporal dynamic and interaction of connection and disconnection and treating them not as exclusive states, but as sort of a continuum will be essential, I think, in future studies. Also, and that would be the third point, from a self-control point of view, from a self-regulation point of view, disconnection is only one side of the medal. We've talked about disconnection as deliberately setting limits to connectivity. So deciding upfront not to be available in a given situation, shutting off your smartphone when you go on a date or when you want to concentrate on writing a research paper. This would be forms of preventive self-control. So you know that in a certain situation, you don't want to be connected, so you take action preventively and disconnect. But very often, disengagement may be more important. So finding the right time to stop media use. Disengagement refers to the act of intervening with media use and terminating exposure in a given situation. So very often problems evolve not because people are connected, but they overuse technologies and don't stop using them at the right point in time. And unfortunately, right now we hardly have any theory or research on disengagement processes. There's a few recent studies, for example, by Alexandrovsky and O'Brien in HCI research. And our team also tries to work on this as well, but we barely know how disengagement processes work, and also, of course, how they interact with disconnection processes. So this, I believe, is another very important issue for future research. And finally, and now maybe you will say, finally, he's talking about something interesting here. Of course, interface design and user experience also play a major role that we as media psychologists have largely ignored. So I'm particularly interested in your perspective on this. Of course, there's many design features that are intended to or could potentially help people to disengage or to use their technologies, their devices less frequently. One example that is often used in intervention studies is grayscaling, for example. So using the display settings of your device to set it to black and white mode. And the idea is that makes it easier for people to disengage from smartphone use, basically because it's less fun, which of course is part of the problem. So there are studies about that. For example, Decker et al. Did a study where they surveyed participants for 14 days or 3 times over a 14-day period. In the first week, people used their smartphones in the normal way as they would always do. And in the second week, they were instructed to set it to black and white mode, to grayscale it. The usage was tracked for the whole 2-week period. And there was a post-intervention survey to see what effects the whole manipulation had on people's usage and well-being. And the results show that, yes, there's some positive effects. People reduced usage time, though we do not find reductions in usage frequency, which makes sense. Grayscaling is not supposed to help people disconnect, so to use the smartphone less frequently, but to reduce usage time, help them to disengage more quickly, which obviously is the case. Also, people perceived less overuse and stress, so positive well-being effects. There was no change in sleep quality. But for me, the main finding is a qualitative one. So the authors also collected qualitative data in the study. And based on that, they come to the conclusion that participants that perceive the grayscaling mode as not particularly helpful, but rather as annoying. So although obviously this helps, people hate it. And of course, it's not a big surprise because making technology less fun, of course, users will not appreciate that. But of course, this brings us to the question of how we can actually create interventions that do not ruin user experience, that help people to disconnect, help people to disengage without negatively impacting their user experience. So I guess there's lots of room for discussion with regard to interface design and user experience. From my point of view, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but from an outsider, it appears that user experience design traditionally shows a very strong focus on building and retaining user engagement. And of course, it makes sense that this is in the focus of UX research. But as we see, users seem to have a growing demand for disconnecting, for disengaging. So I think for the future, it will be a very interesting and very important question to see how potential conflicts between goals of tech companies, goals of developers, who of course also have financial interests, how they conflict with users' needs for disconnection and disengagement, but also how sort of we can make peace between the two perspectives. I think Alicia already put it very nicely in her presentation on the discussion. Tech companies should have an interest in catering to the disconnection needs of their users, because in the long run, if they don't, people may move away from their technology, may be frustrated and decide that it's not good for them to use certain applications. Second, I think we need to have a a growing awareness of the fact that disengagement, just like engagement, is goal-driven. So people do not mindlessly switch off their phones. People do not mindlessly end a gaming session or end a social media session, but because disengagement also caters to goals and needs that people have and that need to be supported by interface design, by user experience design. So I think it's an important question how to consider disengagement goals more systematically in the design process in the future, maybe. And coming back to this theme of resilience from the beginning, I think the main question is how we can increase digital resilience by designing self-determined forms of disengagement. So think more about interface features that may, for example, provide positive points of closure. Give people opportunities to disengage from technology or from applications at the right point in time when it also feels good for them to end use. We have to think more about what kind of interventions can facilitate disconnection without impairing perceived autonomy and enjoyment, and overall how we can increase user agency and help them to find the balance between disconnection and disengagement and connection on the other hand that they personally need. These are open questions to me, and I'm very interested in the UX and HCI perspective on this. So I'd be very happy if we could maybe talk a bit about this in the discussion. Thanks so much.
For this, I think, amazing talk. I think you provided an angle on the human side of things, on the humane of this computer interaction with valid points and open points that we might even the community approach from a different angle. But I would like just to open for questions. I have many actually, but let's yeah. So yes, please.
Congratulations on your work. Just a question and a comment. The question is whether perhaps I missed it, whether the research was deployed in a specific target age group, because I guess social media and discomfort, etc., varies a lot with age groups, from kids from 13 years old to senior people. So that's whether it was targeted to specific target group. And the second, just a comment that because we in our company we're concluding work with digital health and an application for encouraging cancer survivors. One of the things that we were capturing as data from the survivors, the patients themselves, was social media engagement, and what part of the application was to make them aware how much time do they spend for Viber, for specific social media. And we noticed that the second top screen in the mobile app that users look into daily is how much time they spend themselves. So it's important for them. Not steps, not physical. Probably they have they were smartwatches, etc. But that was the second top.
Thanks so much. First for the comment, I think that's really interesting, and I think it underlines how motivated people are to actually reflect on their use and to be aware of what they're doing with their technology, and also to get some control over that. Which of course doesn't mean that they're successful with it, but at least there's a lot of motivation to actually engage in this disconnection process. With regard to the populations that the research is based on, absolutely, this is another limitation that could have also been on the slide with the 4 main limitations. Much of the work out there is on student populations. Of course, students are a population that, so university students, a population that uses technology quite heavily. So connection, disconnection are an important issue for that kind of target group. But definitely would be very important to look at connection, disconnection process also in other audiences and user groups in the future, definitely.
Thank you so much for your talk. I very much enjoyed it. I think it was very enlightening, and I appreciate also the connection that you're trying to make with UX, HCI. More a comment, I guess. I was thinking throughout that, and you touched upon this, the various shades of gray. It's not disconnection, connection
Right.
only. And I think it also has to do with purpose of connection. So I'm connected to my team at work, and I can't lose that connection because that's how we use Discord, for example, and there's constantly something about papers and this and that, or I need to be connected to see if the ferries will leave tomorrow because of the weather, so for practical reasons. On the other hand, I'm overwhelmed with all of these different messages for social reasons, right? And I don't like that, and I would like to be disconnected. So is there a way to design for partial disconnection? I'm wondering, and this would be an interface issue as well.
Yeah.
Like somehow grouping, let's say, the applications, because one of my real reasons of stress is I get a message in WhatsApp and Viber, by SMS and email. All of these are gathered onto my smartphone, and then I don't remember if I responded to one, where it was. So that's stress. Is there some way to somehow collect these, group them, and tag them as work, practical, need to be connected, or don't need to be connected, disconnect, or see them later, or whatever? So maybe this is a direction of, UX, UI design.
Yeah, I think it's both a direction for design, but also for research. I mean, we try to look into different reasons for disconnection already. There's another paper out of the larger data set that Alicia has been collecting that I've been talking about that looks more into different motivations for disconnection. I think psychologically, the main difference in motivations is intrinsically versus extrinsically motivated disconnection behaviors. But I totally agree that looking more closely into micro reasons for disconnection, so not really psychological motivations, but factual reasons for connecting or disconnecting would be super interesting. And also thinking about ways to make it easier to easily manage connection, disconnection on an application level for people on a device, for example. I think that would be super helpful to group applications and to have better control and easier control to manage connection, disconnection at the same time on the same device. Right.
Yeah, maybe it's just a comment to build on what Maria mentioned. I think we need to step back, and in your talk, you frame stress as something negative, right? But I think in psychology, there is also the positive stress, the concept of eustress, which is derived from the Greek word, which is the good. So I'm thinking, building on Maria's question, if we step back and frame stress not also as negative, but also we look at the positive side, maybe we'll be able to use, because the eustress is in a sense is used for growth, right? Or can we disentangle these two types of stress to help the user understand when they need to be connected or disconnected?
Yeah, I think that's a super helpful comment. In psychology, we tend to frame stress in an exclusively negative way, and usually use different concepts to tackle eustress, for example, positive forms of challenge. But I think it's super important to differentiate between both and also see how connection, disconnection, how they relate to both negative forms of stress versus positive forms of being engaged with tasks, of being challenged by tasks and technologies. Both are different sides of the same coin that have to be taken into consideration. I agree.
Yeah, thank you for the talk. I really enjoyed it, and congratulations for all this setting up.
Thank you.
And this wonderful team of yours who work on these issues. It's more a reflection on what you presented, and I will start because I've noticed you made a reference to the anxious generation of Jonathan Haidt's book. We usually refer to it, and you made a negative comment. I don't agree with it. You said, if I'm not wrong. So based on that observation, I would like to build on and frame it somehow historically, your research, but the situation we are all in right now. And I make reference to a book I use at my lectures in this topic, which is by a guy called Jason Farman. The book is Mobile Interface Theory, which basically the position of this book is that we've redefined, and that's about 20 years ago, 2007, I think, the first smartphone appeared. And then the continuous connectivity was with the good connection in the Western world, at least. And we redefine space and time. So it's a new reality now we live in. And the meaning we make of the world is an extended meaning from our perceptions, because these media are always around us, and they enhance the meaning of the world. And since this guy is a phenomenologist, makes reference to Heidegger's ready at hand, the tools are invisible and are part of our being, our existence. Okay, so if we accept this condition, I just wonder whether your stance against this connection, and I understand it is a psychological construct like stress you study, is very useful for all of us. And the point of Maria is very good, that we would like to be more powerful to define from our point of view and not from specific applications, as she said, the degree of connectivity in certain phases. But just to look at the phenomenon as if it's a bad thing, an evil thing, and well-being definition is the more time we are disconnected, the better we are. That's like, I don't know, thinking of when electricity appeared in the world and try to think, oh, this is an evil thing and change our life, and try to study people who want to go back to caves and not connect to the to electricity conditions. So I would like to know your stance. What do you think? You just observe this phenomena, or you think you share some people's idea, like the anxious generation, this is really bad thing and we should try to be as much disconnected as possible?
No, I think that what you're saying is absolutely right, and what we're trying is not making the mistake of this black or white thinking about technologies and their implications, because of course life is much more complex. I think that new technologies, like you said, they add a new layer to life. They change processes. They change interactions. They also change cognition. But for me, as a starting point, I always try to look at these changes in a neutral way, because usually they have positive and negative implications, and also for different user groups, very different implications. So there's always people who benefit more from technology, and others are more vulnerable to the risks that are connected to technology. So I think, and what I criticize most about books like Haidt's is that they are alarmistic. They make big claims based on weak correlational data, which is popular. You can sell a lot of books with this, but it doesn't describe reality in a way that we as scientists should be interested in describing the world. So I think we need nuance. We need to be aware that change is always positive and negative. And as media psychologists, we really try to understand the boundary conditions, the preconditions for positive and negative effects, to then help people shape their behavior in these new media environments, which will not go away, in a way that supports their autonomy, that supports their well-being, to make it easier for them to navigate the challenges they face. That, I think, that should be the goal, I think. Yeah.
Hello. Very nice work and research. I really enjoyed the conversation also you started over here. As a younger generation, I would like to make a more negative comment, because your research is very important, as I said, and the conversation you start. But I cannot help to focus to that we just talked only about the effects mostly. And of course, a way of trying to evaluate what's happening is very important, and trying to figure out how to solve it in a way. It means that it's a problem somehow, and but it only feels like we're scratching the surface and creating maybe a patch. And I cannot help to think that I can draw similarities with an actual addiction, and I think I'm not the first one to do so. But yes, but it feels like it feels to me as well, and I think that's why I'm saying I'm a younger generation, because we grew up in a society that was the first, let's say, the first test subjects. I'm 28 years old, so I remember myself without a smartphone and a digital connection, and before I was a pop. And now that I'm trying to figure out how to not be, although of course I agree with you, I need it for my work and to stay connected, because all those stuffs are very important. I cannot imagine myself without electricity, as Mr. Avuri said. But that's what I draw my parallels with, and also my constant question, because that's why I feel it's an addiction, and you won't see effects with the addiction, and without the addiction, you probably will be like, I want it back, not to be away from it, especially when it's on the tip of your fingertips. You're gonna go back to it. How can we survive or design or stay positive in a world where the designers of bigger companies, and most of the designers, even if we're researchers, are trying to design solutions, applications that keep us connected to smartphones and digital ways, and they also are trying to make it more engaging. They created the infinite loop, they created ways just to keep us addicted.
Very many, very good points, and it's hard to think how to start or where to start. Maybe first, I think I totally understand what you're saying, but I think it also connects nicely to some of the things that were in the presentation. For example, I think this feeling that you're voicing, and I think that is also characteristic for many members of your generation. I think this nicely connects this idea of a digital backlash. So this feeling of unease people have with regard to technologies, particularly those people whose lives are so interwoven with these technologies now. So I think that that is a real thing, and we see that, and we also acknowledge that in our research. However, in media psych, we usually try to avoid the term addiction, because it has a lot of problems. It has the danger of pathologizing behavior that is not pathological. So there's a very high threshold for behavior to become pathological, and though people may feel challenged and also restricted by technologies and behaviors in their everyday lives, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're addicted. Also, because I think the addiction label victimizes people and also suggests that you can't really do something about it, that it's not within your own sort of power to change behavior. We usually talk about media habits, which also describe processes of automatization, of not thinking about your behavior anymore, of having trouble controlling it, but it's not a pathological form of behavior, but something that you can regain control over in your everyday life. And with regard to the future prospect, I'm a bit more optimistic. I do see that we're now in a phase where industry is still very much focused on increasing engagement, but I think that the negative and ambivalent feelings that users like you are developing with regard to this, that they mark a turning point. And I think that we've seen similar developments in other areas, for example, privacy. When I started out as a doctoral student, we did a lot of research about privacy in social media. At the beginning of social media, people were very, very unreflective about their private data. Partly they're still, but the regulations have changed. So we see that usually it takes a lot of time for regulators, for the civil society to react to technological innovations, but in the end they usually do, and I expect to see at least some steps into this direction with regard to engagement, disengagement, disconnection, freedom to disconnect, also in the future. But I agree that we're not there yet.
So I think, thank you very much for the questions. I think that's very let's say, provoking. Before we close the session, I would like also, if I may, address just a remark, just food for thought, let's say, because your work, I think it's very useful to understand the more basic theoretical perspective of modeling behaviors in relation to interactions, and which is the basis for me to explain and interpret outcomes today, and also helps me argue a bit more about the work we did with Professor Moullas some years back, publishing a paper in 2019, if I'm not mistaken. While when thinking about engagement, we more or less saw it as a more game theoretical phenomenon that exists, but you will never going to be able to predict it. When it exists, how long it's going to be, or when, let's say, disconnection will happen. And which, of course, ties to the motivation, as Maria said, and to the user experience evolution of the user with interaction on situation-specific environments. So I want to tie that to the main problem that I think, main challenge that there is, to create a theory that would be able to include behavioral aspects that tied, let's say, to the concept of disconnection with intermediary interaction that might exist. And the question is, if we're going to be able to achieve such a modeling, given the various shades of gray, as Maria again said, and the multidimensionality, not only of the user as an entity, but also the interaction, let's say, instances that have been generated into various environments, or are we going to only talking about a situation-specific modeling that ties to context, activity, and time?
Brilliant comment. And in fact, Alicia is working on a theoretical model that tries to describe disengagement processes on a situational basis. But I think that you bring up a lot of additional issues that we could take into consideration. I think it's yet another good example of how MediaPsych and HCI can sort of fruitfully engage with each other.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot.
So let's thank one more Professor Reinecke.